The auctioneer's hammer fell with a hollow thud that echoed through the empty courthouse. "Sold for $4 to the gentleman in the back." But Marcus Wheeler wasn't celebrating. He stared at the deed in his trembling hands, wondering what kind of curse he'd just bought for the price of a cup of coffee. What he'd find on that abandoned Cherokee land would change everything he thought he knew about family, survival, and the ghosts that refused to stay buried. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The December wind cut through Marcus Wheeler's threadbare coat like a blade seeking bone. He hunched deeper into the collar, his breath forming white clouds that dissipated as quickly as his hopes had over the past year. The courthouse steps stretched before him, slick with ice that reflected the gray Montana sky. Each step felt like walking toward his own execution. Inside the musty building, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sickly shadows across peeling paint and water-stained ceiling tiles. The auction room smelled of old coffee and broken dreams. Marcus clutched, the crumpled newspaper clipping in his pocket, the foreclosure notice that had brought him here, his last $4, his final chance. The auctioneer, a rail-thin man named Hendricks with yellowed teeth and suspicious eyes, called the crowd to order. What crowd there was consisted of maybe 15 people scattered across folding chairs that had seen better decades. Most were vultures, Marcus knew. Real estate developers waiting to snatch up distressed properties for pennies on the dollar. "Next item," Hendricks announced, consulting his clipboard with the enthusiasm of a man reading obituaries. "The former Blackwater Ranch, 347 acres in the Northern Valley. Property includes main house, outbuildings, and mineral rights." He paused, clearing his throat uncomfortably. "I'm required to disclose that this property has been unoccupied for some time due to various local concerns." A murmur rippled through the sparse crowd. Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Cursed, Cherokee burial ground. 3 families tried, all left within months." He felt his stomach clench. Local superstitions or not, an abandoned ranch might be exactly what he could afford. The bidding started at $500. Marcus watched, heart sinking, as a developer in an expensive suit immediately jumped it to $800. Another voice called out $1,200. The price climbed steadily, $1,500. 2,000, 2,500. Far beyond anything Marcus could dream of reaching. Then something strange happened. As Hendricks continued describing the property's details, the bidding began to slow. When he mentioned the Cherokee connection more specifically, how the land had been part of a forced relocation route, how 3 separate owners had abandoned it, citing unexplained phenomena, bidders started dropping out. $2,600, called the developer, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Any advance on $2,600? Hendricks asked, scanning the room. "This property includes significant timber rights and potential for—" "Excuse me," interrupted an elderly woman in the front row. Marcus recognized her as Sarah Crowfeather, one of the local Cherokee elders he'd met at the diner. "That land holds the spirits of my people. Whoever buys it should know they're not buying empty ground." The developer's face went pale. He stood, abruptly, muttering something about getting into legal complications, and walked out. 2 other bidders followed. The room suddenly felt much emptier. "Well," Hendricks said, clearly flustered. "Do I hear any other bids? 2,600 once?" The remaining crowd shifted uncomfortably. Marcus watched as one by one they seemed to find reasons to examine their phones or study their shoes. The silence stretched like a held breath. 2,600 twice. Marcus's hand shot up before his brain could stop it. $4. The room went dead quiet. Hendricks blinked rapidly as if he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, did you say—" $4, Marcus repeated, his voice stronger now. He stood, legs shaking but determined. It's all I have. A nervous laugh echoed from somewhere behind him. Hendricks looked around the room desperately. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a bid of $4. Do I hear any advance?" The silence was deafening. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, could feel every eye in the room boring into him. Sarah Crowfeather turned in her seat to study him with dark, knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. $4 once. Hendricks' voice cracked slightly. $4 twice. Still nothing. The developer had left. The other bidders seemed frozen, caught between disbelief and superstitious dread. Sold for $4 to... Hendricks consulted his list. Marcus Wheeler. The hammer fell with that hollow thud, sealing Marcus's fate. As the crowd dispersed, most giving him looks that ranged from pity to alarm, Sarah Crowfeather approached. She moved slowly, her weathered face grave. "You know what you've done. Mr. Wheeler," Marcus swallowed hard. "Bought land I can't afford to develop and probably can't afford to keep." She studied him for a long moment. "That land has been calling for someone. 37 years it's been empty. 37 years the children have been waiting." Children? Marcus felt ice form in his veins that had nothing to do with the Montana winter. But Sarah was already walking away, her parting words drifting back like smoke. "You'll understand soon enough. And when you do, remember, some curses are just love that's been waiting too long to find its way home." Marcus stared at the deed in his hands. Blackwater Ranch, 347 acres, his name scrawled in Hendricks's hasty handwriting. $4, his last $4, had just bought him either salvation or damnation. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow in horizontal sheets across the courthouse parking lot. Marcus's ancient pickup truck, a 1987 Ford with more rust than paint, looked like it might not survive the drive to his new property. He'd bought the ranch site unseen, driven by desperation and the kind of reckless hope that comes when you've got nothing left to lose. As he scraped ice from his windshield with a credit card, his scraper had broken weeks ago, Marcus tried to inventory what he knew. The ranch had been abandoned for decades. 3 families had tried to make it work and failed. Local Cherokee elders considered it sacred or cursed or both, and now it was his. The drive north took him through increasingly desolate country. Paved. Roads gave way to gravel, then to dirt tracks barely wide enough for his truck. Snow clung to everything: fence posts, abandoned mailboxes, the skeletal remains of winter trees. The GPS on his phone had given up miles ago, leaving him to navigate by handwritten directions Hendricks had grudgingly provided. "Turn left at the lightning-struck oak," Marcus read aloud, squinting through the windshield. "Continue 2 miles, and past the stone marker." The oak was easy enough to spot, a massive tree split down the middle, its blackened trunk stark against the white landscape. The stone marker took longer to find, nearly hidden beneath decades of accumulated snow and debris. When he finally spotted it, Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The marker was old, far older than any fence post or property boundary he'd seen. Carved symbols covered its weathered surface. Cherokee syllabary mixed with images he couldn't identify. At its base, someone had left offerings: eagle feathers, tobacco ties, small stones arranged in careful patterns. Recent offerings, he realized. Someone still visited this place. The final 2 miles felt endless. The road, if it could be called, that wound through increasingly dense forest. Ancient pines towered overhead, their branches so thick they blocked most of the daylight. Snow fell in a constant whisper, accumulating on his windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Then suddenly, the trees opened into a vast clearing, and Marcus got his first look at what $4 had bought him. Blackwater Ranch sprawled across the valley floor like something out of a fever dream. The main house, a massive log structure, sat dark and imposing at the center of it all. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, barns, sheds, what looked like a small chapel. Everything was covered in snow, giving the entire scene an otherworldly quality, but it was the silence that struck him first. Complete, absolute silence, no wind in the trees, no animal sounds, no distant hum of civilization. Just the sound of his truck's engine and his own breathing. Marcus parked near the main house and stepped out, his boots crunching in snow that came up to his knees. The cold bit at his exposed skin immediately, but he barely noticed. He was too busy staring at his new home. The house was larger than he'd expected, built from massive logs that spoke of an earlier era when trees grew bigger and men built things to last. But something was wrong with it. The windows were dark, not just because no one was home, but dark in a way that seemed to swallow light. And there, barely visible through the snow-covered glass of what might have been a kitchen window, was that Marcus. Blinked hard, convinced his eyes were playing tricks on him. For just a moment, he could have sworn he saw a small face pressed against the glass. A child's face, pale and desperate. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Just the wind starting to pick up and the first real hint of the storm that was coming. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The front door of Blackwater Ranch hung slightly ajar, creaking on rusted hinges that sang a mournful tune with each gust of wind. Marcus approached cautiously, his boots leaving deep prints in the untouched snow. The porch boards groaned under his weight, and he noticed several were rotted through, revealing dark gaps that seemed to breathe with the house's rhythm. Inside, the air hung thick with decades of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light filtering through grimy windows. The main room was vast, dominated by a stone fireplace large enough to walk into. Furniture sat draped in white sheets like ghosts frozen mid-conversation. Everything smelled of old wood, mouse droppings, and something else, something Marcus couldn't quite identify, but that made his skin crawl. He pulled out his phone to use as a flashlight, but the screen showed no signal. Of course, he was truly alone out here. Moving deeper into the house, Marcus discovered room after room of abandoned life. A kitchen with cast-iron pots still sitting on a wood-burning stove. A dining room with 12 chairs arranged around a massive oak table, as if the occupants had simply stepped away mid-meal. Upstairs, bedrooms filled with furniture covered in layers of dust so thick his footsteps left clear prints on the floor. But it was what he found in the last bedroom that stopped him cold. Dozens of children's drawings covered the walls, pinned up with rusty tacks. Crude crayon sketches of stick figures holding hands, of animals, of what looked like the ranch itself. In the corner sat a small rocking horse, its paint faded but lovingly carved. A child's jacket hung on a peg by the window, too small, too old, but somehow looking like it had been placed there yesterday. Marcus picked up one of the drawings, his hands shaking slightly. At the bottom, in a child's careful printing, were the words, "We are waiting for someone to come home." A crash from downstairs made him jump, the drawing fluttering from his fingers. He listened, heart pounding, but heard only the wind. Probably just something blown over by the storm. Still, he made his way downstairs more quickly than he'd gone up. The kitchen window was open, snow blowing in to form small drifts on the sill. Marcus was certain it had been closed when he'd first looked through it. As he moved to shut it, something outside caught his eye, a path in the snow leading away from the house toward one of the larger outbuildings. Fresh footprints, small ones. Marcus grabbed a heavy flashlight from a kitchen drawer and followed the trail. The snow was coming down harder now, already beginning to fill in the tracks. Whatever had made them couldn't be far ahead. The trail led to what had once been a bunkhouse, a long, low building designed to house ranch hands. The door stood open, darkness yawning beyond. Marcus called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" His voice echoed strangely, as if the building were much larger inside than it appeared. No answer. He stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Rows of bunk beds lined the walls, their metal frames orange with rust. Moth-eaten blankets lay scattered across thin mattresses, and there, in the farthest corner, huddled together like frightened animals, were the children. 12 of them, ranging. In age, from maybe 6 to 16. They wore clothes that looked like they belonged to another era, hand-sewn shirts, patched overalls, dresses made from flour sacks. Their dark hair hung long and unkempt, their faces gaunt with hunger and cold. But it was their eyes that hit Marcus like a physical blow. Ancient eyes in young faces, eyes that had seen too much and hoped for too little. The oldest, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, stepped protectively in front of the others. "Don't hurt us, mister," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't take nothing. We've been real quiet." Marcus lowered the flashlight, not wanting to blind them. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Marcus. I bought this place today. What are you doing here? Where are your families?" The children exchanged glances, communicating in that wordless way kids do. The oldest girl, clearly their leader, spoke again. "This is our family. Been our family for a long time." "How long?" Marcus asked gently, crouching down to their level. A smaller boy, maybe 8 years old, piped up. "Since the bad men came and said we had to leave our real home. But we got nowhere else to go, so we stayed here instead." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "What bad men? When did this happen?" The children looked confused, as if time itself were a foreign concept. The girl, who introduced herself as Annie Whitefeather, tried to explain. "The men with papers. They said our families couldn't stay on the old land no more. Said we had to go to the school, but..." She shuddered. "We heard stories about that school, so we ran here instead. The spirits told us it was safe." As Marcus listened, pieces of a horrific puzzle began falling into place. These weren't just homeless children. They were Cherokee kids who had somehow ended up abandoned on this ranch. But when? The clothes, their manner of speaking, even their names suggested they'd been here for decades. Yet they looked real, solid, undeniably present. "Annie," he said carefully, "what year do you think it is?" She frowned. 1987. "Why?" Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "Annie, it's 2024. The children stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. The youngest, a girl who couldn't have been more than 6, began to cry silently, tears freezing on her cheeks in the bitter cold. "That can't be right," Annie whispered. "We just got here. We've been waiting for someone to come help us, get back to our families, but..." Her voice trailed off as the impossibility of Marcus's words sank in. Looking around the bunkhouse with new eyes, Marcus began to notice details that chilled him. The children cast no shadows in his flashlight beam. Their breath didn't fog in the frigid air the way his did. And now that he was paying attention, he realized he could see through them just slightly, as if they were projected images rather than solid flesh and blood. But they were cold. He could see them shivering, could hear their teeth chattering. Whatever they were suffering. "Listen to me," Marcus said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "I don't understand what's happening here, but I can see you're cold and scared. Come back to the main house with me. I'll get a fire going, find some food." You can see us?" asked a boy of about 10, wonder creeping into his voice. "Really see us?" "Of course I can see you. You're right here." The children began to whisper excitedly among themselves in what Marcus realized was Cherokee. Annie turned back to him, hope flickering in her dark eyes for the first time. "Most people can't see us. We've been trying to ask for help for so long, but they just walk right through us like we ain't even here." Marcus stood slowly, his mind reeling. Ghosts. He'd bought a ranch haunted by the spirits of Cherokee children who died here nearly 40 years ago. Children who'd been running from something so terrible they'd chosen to hide in an abandoned ranch rather than face it. But why could he see them when others couldn't? And more importantly, what did they need from him? "Come on," he said, extending his hand to Annie. To his amazement, her small fingers felt solid and real when they grasped his, though cold as winter stone. "Let's get you all somewhere warm." The journey back to the main house was surreal. The children moved like a pack, staying close together, constantly looking over their shoulders as if expecting pursuit. They chatted quietly in Cherokee, occasionally, switching to English to point out changes to the ranch since they'd first arrived. "That barn wasn't there before," said one boy, pointing to a structure Marcus had assumed was original. "And the big tree by the house, it was just a sapling when we came," added Annie. Inside the main house, Marcus immediately went to work building a fire in the massive stone fireplace. The children watched from a safe distance, as if they'd learned not to expect kindness from adults. As flames began to lick at the dry kindling, warmth slowly filled the room. The children crept closer, hands extended toward the heat. Marcus noticed that their clothes began to look less tattered near the fire, their faces less gaunt. The warmth seemed to make them more solid, more present. "Better?" he asked. Unanimous nods. For the first time since he'd found them, some of the children actually smiled. As they settled around the fire, Marcus began to piece together their story. They were all Cherokee, ranging from the same extended family group. In 1987, when they were between 6 and 16 years old, government officials had come to force their families off their ancestral land. The children had been scheduled for transport to a boarding school, one of the infamous institutions designed to kill the Indian, save the man. Terrified by stories they'd heard about the school, the 12 had run away instead, seeking shelter at the abandoned Blackwater Ranch. But winter had come early and harsh that year. They died here, one by one, of cold and starvation, always believing someone would come to save them. "We've been waiting so long," Annie said softly, staring into the flames. "Waiting for someone who could see us, who could help us find our way. Home to our families." Marcus felt tears freezing on his cheeks as the full tragedy hit him. 12 children trapped between worlds for nearly 4 decades, unable to move on because they died believing rescue was coming. "Your families," he said gently. "Annie, they would be very old now. Many might have passed on themselves." She nodded sadly. "We know. We can feel them sometimes, calling to us from the spirit world, but we can't go to them. Something's keeping us here." "What?" Annie looked around at her family. Because that's what they were, Marcus realized, bound together by shared trauma and decades of mutual protection. "We made a promise," she said, "when the first of us started getting real sick from the cold. We promised we'd all stay together, that none of us would go on alone. We've been keeping that promise ever since." Marcus stared into the fire, understanding dawning. These children had created their own prison, their love for each other becoming the chains that bound them to this place. They couldn't move on because they wouldn't abandon each other. And they couldn't all move on together because they didn't know how. Outside, the storm was intensifying. Snow piled against the windows, and the wind howled through gaps in the old logs. But inside, around the fire, 12 Cherokee children who had been alone for 37 years finally had someone who could see them, hear them, and maybe, just maybe, help them find their way home. Dawn broke gray and reluctant over Blackwater Ranch, filtering through windows caked with ice and decades of grime. Marcus woke on the living room floor, his back screaming from sleeping on ancient floorboards. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the house felt tomb cold. For a moment, he wondered if the previous night had been an exhaustion-induced hallucination. Then he heard the soft murmur of Cherokee, voices from the kitchen. He found them clustered around the old wood-burning stove, which somehow had a cheerful fire crackling inside. Annie was showing the younger children how to hold their hands just right to catch the warmth, while the older boys had arranged themselves as windbreaks for the little ones. They looked up when Marcus entered, 12 pairs of dark eyes watching him with careful hope. "Morning," he said, his voice rusty with sleep. "How did you light the stove?" A boy named Thomas, maybe 14, with serious eyes and calloused hands, gestured vaguely. "Been taking care of it for years, mister. Spirit's got to stay warm too, I guess." Marcus nodded, as if ghost children maintaining a fire was perfectly normal. Maybe in this place it was. "Anyone hungry?" The question sparked something close to laughter among the children. A girl named Rose, about 12, spoke up with gentle sarcasm. "We don't exactly eat regular food anymore. Been trying for decades. Nothing tastes like anything, just passes right through us." But Annie added quickly, "We remember food. We remember what it was like to be hungry, and what it felt like when that hunger went away. Maybe if you ate something, we could remember better." Marcus spent the morning taking inventory of his new property, both the physical and spiritual assets. The children followed him in a loose pack, chattering constantly. They'd been alone with only each other for 37 years, and having an adult who could see and hear them had unleashed a torrent of stored-up conversation. He learned that little Joseph, the 6-year-old, had died first, caught pneumonia that winter, and passed quietly in his sleep. The others had laid him to rest in the small cemetery behind the chapel, marking his grave with stones arranged in traditional Cherokee patterns. One by one, the cold and hunger had claimed them all, until only Annie remained. She'd lasted until spring, sustained by sheer determination to keep watch over the others' graves. "I promised my mama I'd take care of the little ones," she explained as they walked past the cemetery. "Couldn't break that promise even after dying." The graves were neat, lovingly maintained despite being tended by ghost hands. Each had a small shelter built over it, rough lean-tos made from salvaged wood and tin roofing. Offerings sat at each. Headstone, eagle feathers, small stones, braided sweetgrass that somehow stayed fresh despite the decades. "People still come," explained David, one of the middle children. "Cherokee people. They leave things, say prayers. They can't see us, but they know we're here." Marcus thought of Sarah Crow Feather's words at the courthouse. "The children have been waiting." The local Cherokee community had never forgotten about the 12 who'd vanished. They'd been keeping vigil all these years. "Do you know how they died? I mean, do you remember?" The children exchanged those silent looks again. Finally, Thomas spoke. "Cold, mostly. Little Joseph first, like Annie said. Then Mary and Sam together, they was twins, died the same night holding hands. Rest of us lasted longer, but..." He shrugged. "Weren't no food, weren't no way to stay warm enough. We knew we was dying, but we stayed together." As they explored the ranch, Marcus began to understand the strange physics of his new reality. The children could interact with certain objects, fires, doors, simple tools, but not others. Food passed through them like air. Modern electronics went haywire in their presence. But older things, especially items that had been on the ranch when they'd first arrived, responded to their touch as if they were still alive. "It's strongest in winter," Annie explained. "When it gets real cold, like it was when we passed, we can touch more things. Summer, we're barely here at all, just shadows and whispers." Marcus found a working generator in one of the outbuildings and managed to get minimal electricity running to the main house. The children watched in fascination as lights flickered on for the first time in decades. "Magic," breathed little Sarah, the youngest girl. "Science," Marcus corrected gently, then smiled. "But I guess it's both." As the day wore on, Marcus began to see how the children had organized their existence. They had schedules, chores, even games, though their games consisted mostly of hide-and-seek with the living world and elaborate storytelling sessions where they'd recount memories of their families, keeping their culture alive through pure will. Annie was clearly the leader, the one who made decisions and settled disputes. Thomas was the protector, always positioning himself between the younger children and any perceived threat. Rose was the keeper of stories, the one who remembered every detail of Cherokee tradition their families had taught them. Each child had found a role, a purpose that kept them anchored to existence. But Marcus also saw the toll their decades of isolation had taken. Little Joseph spoke only to the other children, struck mute by trauma and death. Two of the older boys, twins named Paul and Peter, had developed an almost telepathic connection, finishing each other's sentences and moving in perfect synchronization. They'd been alone so long, they'd started to change, becoming something more than human, but less than fully spirit. That afternoon, while the children played a complex game involving catching shadows, Marcus drove back to town for supplies. He needed food, blankets, tools to make the ranch livable, but more than that, he needed answers. Sarah Crow Feather was waiting for him at the diner as if she'd known he'd come. "You found them," she said before he could speak. It wasn't a question. Marcus slid into the booth across from her, accepting coffee from a waitress who seemed to know better than to interrupt. "You knew they were there." "My grandmother knew. Her grandmother before her. We've been keeping watch, leaving offerings, saying prayers for 70 years, but you're the first who could see them clear." "Why me?" Sarah studied him with those ancient eyes. "You got Cherokee blood?" Marcus shook his head. "Irish and German mostly. Little bit of everything else." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Sometimes it ain't about blood. Sometimes it's about need. You needed a place to belong, they needed someone to see them. Spirits are funny that way. They find each other." She told him the full story then. The 12 children had come from 3 related families, part of a larger group that had been living on traditional lands in the valley. In 1987, the land had been sold to mining interests, and the families had been given 3 days to relocate. Most had gone to relatives on the reservation, but the 12 children, terrified by stories of forced schooling and cultural erasure, had run instead. Their families searched for months, Sarah said, never found hide nor hair. Come spring, some hunters found signs of a camp at the old ranch, but by then, she shrugged sadly. 12 children, vanished like smoke. Families never stopped. Grieving. Are any of the families still alive? Some. Mary Whitefeather, that's Annie's grandmother, still with us. She's 93 now, but sharp as a tack. Been visiting that ranch every year on the anniversary, leaving food and blankets. The children can't use, but somehow need. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. The offerings at the cemetery. Families got a right to tend their dead, even when the dead won't rest. On the drive back to the ranch, Marcus's truck loaded with supplies, he wrestled with impossible questions. How do you help ghosts? How do you reunite spirit children with families they've been separated from for nearly 4 decades? How do you keep a promise to 12 dead kids who've been waiting for someone to see them for longer than he'd been alive? The children met him at the door, chattering excitedly about the lights and the fire and the strange miracle of having someone who responded when they spoke. They helped him unload supplies, or tried to, their ghost hands passing through most items, but somehow managing to grip the older tools and blankets. That evening, as they sat around the fire again, Marcus asked the question that had been building all day. What do you want? I mean, what do you need from me to find peace? The children looked at each other with those wordless communications. Finally, Annie spoke. We want to go home. We want to see our families again, even if they can't see us. We want to say goodbye proper, the way Cherokee people are supposed to. But we can't leave here, added Thomas. Something holds us. Every time we try to walk away from the ranch, we just end up back here. Marcus nodded slowly. The promise you made to stay together. More than that, Rose said softly. We died here. This ground holds our bones, our last breaths. We're tied to it. Then we need to untie you, Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. And I think I know where to start. He pulled out his phone, showed them Sarah Crowfeather's contact information. Tomorrow, we're going to call your grandmother, Annie. All of your families. It's time they knew you've been here all along. For the first time since he'd found them, the children looked truly hopeful. Little Joseph even smiled. The first expression Marcus had seen from the traumatized boy. Outside, the wind howled around the ranch house, but inside, around the fire, 12 ghost children and one broken man began to plan a reunion, 37 years in the making. Marcus stood in the ranch house kitchen, phone trembling in his hand as he dialed Mary Whitefeather's number. The children clustered around him, their excitement so intense it made the air itself feel electric. The old rotary phone on the wall, one of the few modern devices that seemed to work in their presence, rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello? The voice was aged but strong, carrying the weight of 9 decades, but none of their weakness. Mrs. Whitefeather? This is Marcus Wheeler. Sarah Crowfeather gave me your number. I'm calling about your granddaughter, Annie. A sharp intake of breath. Annie? What about Annie? Did you find something? Bones, maybe, or... Marcus looked at Annie, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. Her small hand rested on his, arm cold but solid, her dark eyes wide with hope and terror in equal measure. Mrs. Whitefeather, this is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully. I bought the Blackwater Ranch yesterday, and Annie is here. She's been here all along, all 12 of them have. The silence stretched so long, Marcus thought the call had dropped. When Mary's voice came back, it was barely a whisper. What did you say? Your granddaughter and the other children, they're here, Mrs. Whitefeather. They didn't move on when they died. They've been waiting. Another long pause. Then in a voice that carried sudden steel, put her on the phone. Marcus looked helplessly at Annie. I don't think she can... But Annie was already reaching for the phone with both hands. As her fingers touched the receiver, the children around them began to sing, low, wordless Cherokee lullabies that seemed to make the very air shimmer. The phone crackled with static, then cleared. Grandmother. Annie's voice came through the speaker, faint but unmistakably real. The sound that came from the other end of the line was pure grief transformed into joy. A wail that contained 37 years of unanswered prayers. Annie, baby, is that really you? It's me, grandmother, I'm here, we're all here. We've been waiting so long for someone who could help us talk to you. What followed was the most heartbreaking conversation Marcus had ever witnessed. Mary Whitefeather, speaking in rapid Cherokee interspersed with English, told her granddaughter about the decades of searching, the years of grief, the way the family had never stopped hoping. Annie responded in the same mixture of languages, her child's voice carrying the weight of 37 years of accumulated love and longing. I knew you were out there somewhere, Mary sobbed. I could feel you, baby. Every year I came to that ranch, left you food and blankets. I knew. We felt you too, grandmother. Your prayers kept us strong, kept us together. The other children pressed closer to the phone, adding their voices. Little Joseph, who hadn't spoken to Marcus directly, whispered, Grandmother Mary, with such longing it broke Marcus's heart. The twins, Paul and Peter, spoke in perfect unison, finishing each other's sentences as they always did. Rose recited a traditional story in Cherokee, her voice carrying across decades to reach the woman who had first told it to her. When Thomas spoke, his young man's voice cracking with emotion, Mary Whitefeather gasped. Thomas! Thomas Riversong! Oh, child, your mother has been waiting. She never remarried, never gave up hope. She's going to... Her voice broke completely. The phone call lasted 3 hours. Marcus found himself crying openly as he listened to conversations between the living and the dead, watched these ghost children reconnect with the grandmother who had never stopped loving them. By the end, they had planned something unprecedented, a gathering. "Tomorrow," Mary said firmly. "I'll bring the families, everyone who's still alive, everyone who remembers. We're going to have a proper reunion." After the call ended, the children were transformed. The constant undertone of sadness that had marked them since Marcus's arrival was gone, replaced by an energy he'd never seen from them. They chatted excitedly in Cherokee, made plans, organized themselves with the efficiency of kids preparing for the best day of their lives. But as night fell, doubts crept in. "What if they can't see us like you can?" Annie asked, her confidence wavering. "What if only our grandmother could hear us through the phone because of all her prayers and visiting?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. His ability to see and interact with the children seemed unique. Even Sarah Crowfeather had mentioned that others couldn't see them clearly. What if tomorrow brought only heartbreak for the living relatives, who came expecting a miracle? "We'll figure it out," he promised, though he had no idea how. That night Marcus couldn't sleep. He wandered the ranch house, checking and rechecking preparations. The children had spent the day cleaning with supernatural efficiency, dust vanishing from surfaces, windows clearing as if wiped by invisible hands, floors suddenly spotless despite decades of neglect. They'd arranged flowers they somehow found, blooming despite the winter cold, set out chairs in the main room, even managed to get the old piano in tune. Around midnight, he found Annie sitting by the kitchen window, staring out at the cemetery. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just thinking about what comes after. If we see our families tomorrow, if we get to say goodbye proper, what happens to us then?" Marcus settled beside her, struck by the maturity in her young face. 37 years of being responsible for 11 other children had aged her in ways that death couldn't touch. "I don't know," he admitted. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to go home," she said simply. "I want to see my parents again, wherever they are, but I also want to make sure everyone else gets home too. That's been my job so long, I don't know how to stop." Maybe that's exactly what you need to do tomorrow. Make sure everyone gets where they need to go. And maybe your job isn't finished until you've done that for all of them. She nodded thoughtfully. "And what about you? When we're gone, you'll be alone here again?" Marcus looked around the kitchen that had become alive with children's laughter over the past few days. The thought of returning to the silence was almost unbearable. But this wasn't about him. "I'll be fine," he lied. "This is about you and your family." Dawn brought a caravan of vehicles up the winding road to Blackwater Ranch. Marcus watched from the porch as trucks and cars navigated the treacherous path, their occupants coming to face 37 years of grief and hope. The children stood beside him, visible only to his eyes, but their presence felt enormous. The first to arrive was Mary Whitefeather, stepping carefully from a battered pickup truck with the aid of a walking stick carved with Cherokee symbols. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had survived everything the world could throw at her and emerged stronger. Behind her came others, middle-aged people who had been young adults when the children disappeared, elderly relatives who remembered holding these kids as babies, younger family members who had grown up hearing stories about the 12 who vanished. Sarah Crowfeather emerged from the second vehicle, along with a man Marcus didn't recognize, tall, dignified, wearing traditional Cherokee clothing despite the cold. "That's Daniel Kingfisher," Annie whispered. "He's a medicine man. Grandmother must have asked him to come." The group gathered in the ranch house main room, sitting in the chairs the children had so carefully arranged. Marcus stood awkwardly to one side, feeling like an intruder in this reunion he'd made possible but didn't really belong to. Mary Whitefeather spoke first, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "Yesterday I got a phone call I've been praying for since 1987. My granddaughter Annie spoke to me. All 12 children spoke to me. They're here, in this room, waiting for us to see them." Some of the assembled relatives looked skeptical. Others leaned forward, hopefully. Marcus could see the children standing near the fireplace, holding hands, watching their families with desperate longing. Daniel Kingfisher began to sing, a traditional Cherokee song that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. As his voice rose and fell, something extraordinary began to happen. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. The fire in the fireplace flared higher without anyone adding wood, and slowly, like photographs developing in a dark room, the children began to appear. It started as just shadows, then outlines. Then gradually they became solid enough to see. Not fully visible like they were to Marcus, but present enough that their families could no longer deny what they were witnessing. "Annie?" Mary Whitefeather's voice cracked as she reached toward her granddaughter. "I'm here, grandmother." Annie stepped forward, and for a moment, just a moment, her hand felt solid enough for Mary to grasp. What followed was chaos of the most beautiful kind. Families reunited across the boundary between life and death, conversations in Cherokee, and English flowing around the room like music. Thomas's mother, now in her 70s but still recognizable, sobbed as she held her eternally young son. The twins' father, grayed and weathered by decades of grief, laughed through his tears as Paul and Peter spoke in their eerie unison, just as they had as living children. Even little Joseph found his voice, speaking directly to a great-aunt who had helped raise him. His words, the first Marcus had heard him say to anyone but the other children. But as the day wore on, Marcus noticed something troubling. The children were becoming less solid, not more. The effort of manifesting for their families was draining them, pulling them thinner and thinner until they flickered like candle flames in a wind. Daniel Kingfisher noticed too. He approached Marcus quietly while the reunions continued around them. "They're using everything they have left to be here," he said in a low voice. "This kind of manifestation, it's burning through their spiritual energy. They won't be able to maintain it much longer." Marcus felt ice in his veins. What does that mean? It means this is goodbye, real goodbye. After today, they'll either move on to wherever they're supposed to be, or they'll fade away completely. There won't be anything left to anchor them here. As if sensing the conversation, Annie looked over at them. Her form was translucent now, barely more substantial than mist, but her smile was radiant. "It's time," she said softly, her voice carrying. "To every person in the room. We got to say what we came to say, and now we can go home." Daniel Kingfisher's weathered hands moved with practiced precision as he arranged sacred items on the ranch house floor. Cedar, sage, sweetgrass, and tobacco formed a circle large enough to encompass all 12 children. The living relatives sat in an outer ring, their faces reflecting decades of accumulated grief finally finding release. "What we're about to do," Daniel explained, his voice carrying the authority of generations of spiritual knowledge, "has never been attempted before. These children have been caught between worlds for 37 years. To free them, we must perform a ceremony that bridges the gap between life and death, between the past and the present." Marcus watched from the doorway, feeling like an outsider, to something sacred and ancient. The children stood within the circle, their forms now so translucent he could see the wall behind them. Annie caught his eye and gestured for him to join them. "You're part of this too," she said softly. "You're the one who made it possible." Daniel nodded when Marcus hesitated. "The bridge builder belongs in the circle. Without you, these children would have remained invisible, their voices unheard." As Marcus took his place beside Annie, Daniel began to speak in Cherokee, his words rhythmic and hypnotic. The other adults joined in when they recognized prayers and songs from their own childhoods. The sound filled the room like water, filling a vessel, each voice adding to the harmony. The children began to change. Instead of growing more solid, they became luminous, their forms outlined in soft golden light. The years of death seemed to fall away from them, revealing them as they had been in life, vibrant, laughing, whole. "Tell them," Daniel instructed, in English. "Tell them what you need them to know." What followed was unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. Each child stepped forward to address their family, speaking words that had been trapped inside them for nearly 4 decades. Thomas faced his mother, now elderly but still recognizable. "Mama, I never stopped loving you. Every day I've been here, I thought about how you used to sing to me when storms came. I wasn't scared when I died because I remembered your voice." His mother, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, reached toward him. Her hand passed through his glowing form, but somehow Marcus could see that she felt something. Warmth, presence, love made tangible. The twins, Paul and Peter, spoke to their father in their eerie unison. "Papa, we know you blamed yourself for not finding us, but we chose to run. We were scared kids who made a scared kid's decision. You couldn't have saved us from our own fear." Their father, a man who had clearly carried guilt like a millstone for decades, broke down, sobbing. "I should have looked harder, should have found you before." "You did find us," Peter said alone, breaking the twins' usual pattern. "Every prayer you said, every tear you cried, we felt all of it. That's what kept us together all these years." Little Joseph, speaking for only the second time since Marcus had met him, whispered to his great-aunt, "I wasn't lonely. Annie took care of me. She sang your lullabies when I was scared." Rose stepped forward, her form shimmering like heat waves. She began to recite genealogies, family histories, traditional stories, everything their families had taught them, preserved perfectly in her memory despite death. "I kept our stories safe," she said. "Now I'm giving them back to you. Don't let them die with us." Each goodbye was unique, personal, carrying the weight of 37 years of unspoken love. Marcus found himself crying openly, overwhelmed by the raw emotions surrounding him. These weren't just ghost children. They were sons and daughters, grandchildren and siblings, each one representing a hole torn in their family's heart that had never healed. But it was Annie's goodbye that broke everyone completely. She approached her grandmother slowly, her golden glow pulsing with each step. "Grandmother, I need to tell you something. The night before we ran away, Mama made me promise to take care of the little ones. She said I was the oldest, that it was my responsibility. I kept that promise, even after dying. I kept them all together, kept them safe, kept them from being scared." Mary Whitefeather nodded, her ancient face wet with tears. "I know, baby. I always knew you would. But I need to tell you why we really ran. It wasn't just the boarding school, though that scared us plenty. We heard men talking, white men in suits who came to see the government people. They said Cherokee children were resilient workers, that the school was just a way station. They were planning to separate us permanent, send us to work farms where we'd never see family again." The room went dead silent. Even Daniel stopped his chanting, his face grave as he absorbed this revelation. "We knew if we went to that school, we'd disappear forever. So we decided to disappear on our own terms, together. We thought if we could hide until the government people left, maybe we could come home. We never meant to die out here." Mary Whitefeather's voice shook with rage and grief. "Those bastards, those goddamn bastards stole everything from us. Our land, our children, our hope. And they made you so scared you chose death over their version of life." "But grandmother," Annie said, her child's voice carrying impossible wisdom, "we didn't really die. We lived. We lived together for 37 years. We raised each other, taught each other, loved each other. We kept our Cherokee hearts beating, even when our bodies stopped. They tried to kill the Indian in us, but we never let them. The ceremony reached its crescendo as Daniel began the final prayers. The children joined hands in their circle, their combined light growing brighter. Marcus felt a strange, tugging sensation, as if something was pulling at his very soul. "What's happening?" he asked Daniel quietly. "The children are preparing to cross over, but they've been anchored to this place, and to you, for so long. The transition won't be easy. They're asking if you'll help them make the journey." Marcus looked at Annie, confusion evident on his face. "What does that mean?" She smiled, that radiant expression he'd come to love over the past few days. "It means we need you to walk with us part way, to the edge of wherever we're going. Will you do that?" Without hesitation, Marcus nodded. These children had already given him more purpose than he'd felt in years. If they needed him to help them find peace, he'd follow them to the ends of the earth. The light surrounding the children intensified until Marcus had to squint. The room filled with the sound of wind, though no wind was blowing. The living relatives pressed closer to the circle, reaching toward their lost children one final time. "Remember us," Annie called out, her voice echoing strangely. "Remember that we chose love over fear, family over safety. Remember that some things are worth dying for, and some loves are stronger than death." The light exploded outward, filling every corner of the room. Marcus felt himself being pulled forward, drawn into something vast and warm and infinitely loving. Around him, the children's laughter echoed like bells, joyful and free for the first time since he'd known them. When the light faded, the children were gone, but in their place stood 12 adults, the people they would have grown up to be. Marcus saw Annie as a woman in her 50s, her face lined with laugh lines and wisdom. Thomas stood tall and proud, wearing traditional Cherokee regalia. The twins had finally separated, each developing their own distinct appearance. Even little Joseph was there, grown into a man with kind eyes and gentle hands. "This is who we would have been," Annie said, her adult voice carrying echoes of the child Marcus had known. "This is the gift our family's love gave us, the chance to grow up, even in death." The adult versions of the children stepped forward to embrace their families one final time. These hugs were solid, real, lasting just long enough for 37 years of grief to transform into something like peace. Then, one by one, they began to fade. Not the slow dissolution Marcus had witnessed before, but a gradual, peaceful transition like figures walking into morning mist. "Where are you going?" Marcus called out, sudden panic gripping him. "Home," Annie replied, her form already translucent. "To our parents, our grandparents, everyone who went before us. We're finally free to join them." "But what about me? What am I supposed to do now?" Annie's laugh was warm and full of love. "You saved us, Marcus Wheeler. You gave us the chance to say goodbye, to grow up, to go home. Now you get to live, really live. This ranch isn't cursed anymore. It's blessed. It's a place where love was stronger than death, where family meant more than life itself." As the last traces of the children faded away, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. The ranch house, empty moments before, now felt full, not with ghosts, but with love, with memory, with the echo of 12 children who had finally found peace. Daniel Kingfisher placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You did something remarkable here. You bridged 2 worlds and helped heal wounds that have been bleeding for decades." Marcus looked around at the living relatives, their faces transformed. The grief was still there, but it was clean grief now, grief that could heal rather than fester. They had their answers, their goodbyes, their peace. Outside, the Montana winter was giving way to an early spring. Through the windows, Marcus could see the first green shoots pushing through the snow, life returning to land that had been frozen. In time, for too long, the curse of Blackwater Ranch was broken. The children were home, and Marcus Wheeler, who had bought a haunted ranch for $4, had found something infinitely more valuable than land or gold. He had found his purpose, his family, and his place in a story much larger than himself. 3. Weeks after the ceremony, Marcus had fallen into a routine that felt both foreign and natural. He woke each morning in the main house that no longer creaked with supernatural presence, built fires that stayed lit without ghostly assistance, and worked on repairs that actually needed doing rather than appearing mysteriously completed. The silence was different now. Not the oppressive emptiness of abandonment, but the peaceful quiet of a home between chapters. He'd been documenting everything, photographing the children's drawings still pinned to bedroom walls, cataloguing the traditional Cherokee items left at the cemetery, writing down every story and detail he could remember from his time with the 12 spirits. Sarah Crowfeather had suggested he contact the Cherokee Nation's Cultural Preservation Office. Those children's stories need to be remembered proper, she'd said, not just by their families, but by history, what happened to them, what they preserved. That's part of our people's legacy. On this particular morning, Marcus was replacing rotted porch boards when he heard the rumble of multiple vehicles approaching. He looked up to see a convoy making its way up the mountain road, 3 pickup trucks, and what looked like a government sedan bringing up the rear. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Government vehicles had never brought good news to this place. The trucks parked in his yard, and a dozen men climbed out, rough-looking characters in expensive work clothes, their faces hard and their movements carrying the swagger of people accustomed to getting their way. The government sedan disgorged 2 men in dark suits who surveyed the ranch with calculating eyes. The apparent leader of the group, a barrel-chested man with silver hair and predatory smile, strode up to the porch. "You Marcus Wheeler?" "That's right. And you are?" "Name's Clayton Hobbs. I represent Apex Mining Consortium. We understand you recently acquired this property." Marcus felt ice forming in his veins. "I did. What's it to you?" Hobbs gestured to one of the suited men, who produced a thick folder. "Well, Mr. Wheeler, seems there's been an oversight. This land sits on one of the richest copper deposits in Montana. Our geological surveys show potential reserves worth upwards of $50 million. One of Hobbs's men, a younger guy with nervous energy, added, "The previous owners never knew what they had. Lucky for you, we're prepared to make a generous offer." Marcus looked at the folder being extended toward him, then back at Hobbs. "Not interested." Hobbs's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Maybe you didn't hear me correctly. $50 million worth of copper. We're offering you $500,000 for the mineral rights alone. That's a pretty good return on a $4 investment." The fact that they knew exactly what he'd paid for the ranch sent warning bells ringing in Marcus's head. "Still not interested." The second suited man stepped forward. "Mr. Wheeler, I'm Agent Patterson, Bureau of Land Management. There are certain federal regulations regarding mineral extraction that might be relevant here. The government has eminent domain authority when it comes to strategic resources." Marcus felt the temperature around him drop, though the morning sun was shining bright. For just a moment he could have sworn he heard a child's voice whispering on the wind, "Don't let them take our home." "You threatening me?" Marcus asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "Not threatening," Patterson replied smoothly, "just explaining options. Cooperation is always preferable to more complex legal proceedings." Hobbs pulled out a contract, his movements aggressive. "Look, Wheeler, you seem like a reasonable man. Sign here, take the money, find yourself a nice little place in town. Everybody wins, except the people buried in that cemetery," Marcus said, nodding toward the small graveyard behind the chapel. "This is sacred ground." Hobbs's laugh was ugly. "Sacred ground? Says who? Bunch of old graves don't mean nothing in court. Progress is progress." Cherokee graves, Marcus clarified, protected under the Native American Graves Protection Act. The nervous younger man whispered something to Hobbs, who scowled. That's a temporary setback at best. Legal challenges can be expensive, time-consuming. You really want to go that route? Before Marcus could answer, another voice cut across the yard. Maybe you should ask the Cherokee Nation what they think about that. Everyone turned to see Daniel Kingfisher approaching, flanked by Sarah Crowfeather and two other tribal elders Marcus didn't recognize. Behind them came Mary Whitefeather, moving slowly but with dignity, leaning on her carved walking stick. Hobbs's expression soured. This is a private conversation, not when it concerns our ancestral land and the graves of our children, Daniel replied calmly. He wore traditional Cherokee clothing and carried himself with the authority of someone who had spent decades fighting for his people's rights. One of the elders Marcus didn't know stepped forward. I'm Robert Standing Bear, legal counsel for the Cherokee Nation. Mr. Wheeler contacted us yesterday about these mining claims. Marcus blinked in surprise. He hadn't contacted anyone, but then he remembered the stack of business cards Daniel had left after the ceremony, including one for the tribal legal office. The Cherokee Nation is filing an immediate injunction against any mining operations on this land, Standing Bear continued. We're also petitioning for federal protection under both the Native American Graves Protection Act and the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. Hobbs's face flushed red. You can't just waltz in here and actually we can, Standing Bear interrupted smoothly, especially when the landowner has formally requested our assistance in protecting sacred sites. Marcus felt a moment of confusion. He hadn't formally requested anything, but he kept his mouth shut. The Cherokee legal team seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Agent Patterson consulted his phone, his expression growing increasingly unhappy. I'm getting word from my superiors that there's already a federal review underway. Apparently someone filed a petition citing historical significance. Mary Whitefeather spoke for the first time, her aged voice carrying surprising steel. This land holds the spirits of 12 Cherokee children who died here in 1987. Their graves are marked, their stories are documented, and their families are still alive to speak for them. She looked directly at Hobbs. You want to desecrate their resting place for copper? You want to destroy the only home they ever found peace in? Ma'am, with all due respect, business is business. Dead is dead. Those kids aren't using the land anymore. The words hung in the air like a slap. The Cherokee elders exchanged glances that could have frozen fire. Even Patterson looked uncomfortable with his partner's bluntness. Marcus felt something shift in the air around them, a presence, familiar and protective. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the wind began to pick up, swirling dead leaves, in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. You're wrong about that, Marcus said quietly. They're still here, still protecting this place, still watching over their families. Hobbs laughed harshly. What are you, some kind of ghost whispering? His words cut off abruptly as every bird in the area suddenly went silent. The wind stopped completely, leaving an eerie stillness that made everyone's skin crawl. In the distance, thunder rumbled. From a cloudless sky, one of Hobbs's men, a tough-looking character with prison tattoos, suddenly backed toward his truck. Boss, maybe we should— Shut up, Tommy! Hobbs snapped, but Marcus could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Daniel Kingfisher began to sing, a low, haunting melody in Cherokee that seemed to make the very ground vibrate. The other elders joined in, their voices creating harmonies that raised goosebumps on Marcus's arms. As they sang, the air around the cemetery began to shimmer, nothing dramatic, nothing that could be easily photographed or documented, but everyone present could feel it, a presence, a watching, a quiet but unmistakable message that this land was protected by forces beyond legal contracts and mining rights. Hobbs's younger associate tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Hobbs, sir, maybe we should reconsider. The federal review, the Cherokee involvement, this could tie us up in court for years." "Years we don't have," Hobbs muttered, his earlier confidence clearly shaken. He looked around the yard, taking in the determined faces of the Cherokee elders, the protective stance Marcus had adopted, and the increasingly nervous behavior of his own men. "This isn't over," he declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "Apex Mining has invested significant resources in surveying this area. We're not just going to walk away." Standing Bear pulled out his own folder, much thicker than the one Hobbs had brought. "Actually, you might want to review these documents. It turns out the original geological survey your company commissioned was conducted without proper permits on tribal land. Any minerals extracted based on that survey would be considered stolen property under federal law." Patterson checked his phone again, his face growing paler. "Mr. Hobbs, I'm being instructed to inform you that all mining permits for this area are being suspended pending the federal review." The defeat was written clearly on Hobbs's face, though he tried to mask it with bluster. "Fine, we'll fight this through proper channels. But mark my words, this land is too valuable to sit empty forever." As the convoy prepared to leave, Hobbs approached Marcus one final time. "You think you've won something here? All you've done is delay the inevitable. When the lawyers and the politicians get involved, your ghost stories won't count for much." Marcus looked past him to the cemetery, where 12 small graves sat peacefully under the Montana sky. For just a moment, he could have sworn he saw a familiar figure standing among the headstones. Annie, translucent but unmistakably present, watching over her family's resting place. "Maybe," Marcus said softly, "but some things are worth fighting. For even if you can't win, those children taught me that." As the vehicles pulled away, leaving dust clouds in their wake, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. Daniel Kingfisher stood beside him, his weathered face serious but not unkind. "This is just the beginning," the medicine man warned. "Men like that don't give up easy, especially when there's that much money involved." "I know," Marcus replied. "But I'm not alone in this fight, am I?" Mary Whitefeather smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her since the ceremony. "No, son. You're family now, and Cherokee families don't abandon each other." Standing Bear approached with his folder. "We'll need to document everything, the children's stories, the spiritual significance of the site, the historical context. The more evidence we have of this land's importance to our people, the stronger our legal position." As the Cherokee delegation prepared to leave, Sarah Crowfeather lingered behind. "You did good today, Marcus, but Daniel's right. This fight is far from over. Are you ready for what's coming?" Marcus looked around at the ranch that had become his home, at the cemetery that held 12 children who had trusted him with their stories, at the land that had somehow called to him when he'd had nothing left to lose. "I'm ready," he said, and for the first time since buying the ranch, he truly meant it. The first sign of trouble came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Marcus woke to the sound of surveying equipment rumbling up his mountain road. By dawn, Apex Mining had established a camp just beyond his property line, their bright orange flags marking potential drill sites in a grid pattern that stretched as far as the eye could see. Marcus stood on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching hard-hatted workers set up expensive-looking machinery under portable floodlights. They were being careful to stay off his land, barely, but their message was clear: "We're not going away." His phone rang as he watched a helicopter circle overhead, obviously conducting aerial surveys. "Marcus," Robert Standing Bear's voice was tense. "You seeing what I'm seeing on the news?" "What news? Turn on Channel 7 now." Marcus fumbled for the old television, finally getting a grainy picture. A perfectly coiffed reporter stood in front of what was unmistakably his ranch, speaking earnestly into the camera. significant mineral discovery that could bring millions in revenue to Montana while creating hundreds of jobs for local communities. However, the project has been stalled by what some are calling frivolous legal challenges based on unsubstantiated claims of spiritual significance. The camera cut to an interview with Clayton Hobbs, who had somehow transformed from the aggressive bully Marcus remembered into a sympathetic businessman in an expensive suit. "We're not trying to harm anyone," Hobbs said with practiced sincerity. "We're simply trying to responsibly develop resources that could benefit everyone. But radical environmental groups and certain tribal interests are using scare tactics and outdated laws to block legitimate economic development." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike as the reporter continued. "Critics of the mining project claim the land is sacred to the Cherokee Nation, but county records show the property was abandoned for decades before being purchased for just $4 by Marcus Wheeler, a drifter with no apparent connection to the area. "A drifter?" Marcus muttered. "Unsubstantiated claims?" The news segment cut to an interview with a local county commissioner Marcus didn't recognize. "Look, we respect Native American heritage, but we can't let every old grave become an excuse to block development. This state needs jobs, needs revenue. We can't be held hostage by ghost stories." Ghost stories. Marcus felt a familiar chill, as if the children were reacting to the dismissive words. His phone rang again. This time, it was Daniel Kingfisher. "You need to get to town," the medicine man said without preamble. "They're calling an emergency county commission meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. Apex has been working the phones, and it sounds like they've got the votes to approve eminent domain proceedings. They can do that? If they can prove economic necessity and public benefit, yes. The federal injunction only covers active mining. It doesn't stop local government from seizing the land for economic development." Marcus felt the walls closing in. "What do I do?" "Fight. We'll be there, but you need to tell your story, the real story. Make them understand what this place means." The Granite Falls County Courthouse was packed that evening, the overflow crowd spilling onto the front steps. Marcus had never seen so many people in the small mountain town. Reporters with cameras, mining company representatives in expensive suits, local ranchers in work clothes, and a significant contingent of Cherokee families who had made the long drive from the reservation. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The 5-member county commission sat behind a worn wooden table, their faces revealing nothing. Commission Chairman Walt Peterson, a heavy-set man with the demeanor of someone who had grown tired of controversy, called the meeting to order. "We're here to consider Resolution 47B regarding the potential economic development of the former Blackwater Ranch property," Peterson announced. "The commission will hear public comment before making any decisions." Clayton Hobbs was the first to speak, and Marcus had to admit the man was effective. He presented charts showing potential tax revenue, job creation numbers, and economic impact studies. He spoke passionately about struggling families who needed work, about declining rural communities that could be revitalized by mining operations. "This isn't just about corporate profits," Hobbs declared. "This is about the future of Granite Falls, about giving our young people a reason to stay instead of fleeing to the cities. We're talking about transforming this community." A parade of Apex-friendly speakers followed. Local business owners talked about increased revenue from mining workers spending money in town. The president of the Chamber of Commerce presented studies showing similar mining operations in other states. A representative from the construction union spoke about the hundreds of high-paying jobs the mine would create. Marcus watched the commission members' faces, seeing them nod approvingly at the economic arguments. When it came time for opposition speakers, the mood in the room shifted. Sarah Crow Feather was the first to approach the microphone. My name is Sarah Crow Feather, and I am an elder of the Cherokee Nation. The land you're discussing is not just real estate to be bought and sold. It is the resting place of 12 children who died there in 1987, children who were my people, my blood. She spoke about the historical significance of the site, about the children's stories, about the cultural importance of protecting burial grounds. But Marcus could see the commissioners growing restless, checking their watches, shuffling papers. Daniel, Kingfisher, followed, speaking eloquently about religious freedom and the legal protections afforded to Native American sacred sites. Robert Standing Bear presented a detailed legal argument about federal jurisdiction and tribal rights, but it was Mary Whitefeather who truly captured the room's attention. The elderly woman approached the microphone slowly, her walking stick tapping against the courthouse floor. The crowd grew quiet, sensing something powerful in her presence. "I am 93 years old," she began, her voice carrying clearly despite her age. "I have buried my husband, 3 of my children, and more grandchildren than any woman should have to. But the hardest grave I ever dug was the one in my heart for Annie Whitefeather, my granddaughter who vanished in 1987. She paused, looking directly at each commission member. "For 37 years, I didn't know if she was alive or dead, if she was safe or suffering. That kind of not knowing, it eats at you like cancer. It consumed my family, destroyed relationships, left wounds that never healed." Her voice grew stronger. 3 weeks ago, I finally got to say goodbye to my granddaughter. I got to tell her. I loved her, got to hear her voice one more time. That happened because a good man bought that land and helped those children find peace. She turned to face the crowd. "Now you want to dig up their graves for copper? You want to destroy the only home those children ever found peace in? For what? Money?" The room was dead silent. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling notes. "I've lived through the Depression, World War II, and more tragedy than most folks can imagine, but I have never seen evil as pure as what's being proposed here tonight. You want to desecrate the graves of children for profit. You want to destroy sacred ground for tax revenue." Commissioner Peterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Whitefeather, we appreciate your concerns, but I'm not finished." Her voice cut like a blade. "You think this is just about money and jobs. You think you can put a price on everything. Let me tell you what those children are worth." She pulled out a worn photograph, holding it up for the crowd to see. "This is Annie at age 12, the last picture ever taken of her. She was going to be a teacher, wanted to help Cherokee children learn to read. Thomas Riversong was going to be a veterinarian, loved animals more than anything. Rose was already writing down our old stories, keeping our culture alive." Mary's voice broke slightly. "They were going to be doctors, teachers, artists, parents. They were going to change the world. But they died scared and alone because men in suits decided their land was worth more than their lives." She fixed her gaze on the commissioners again. "And now different men in suits want to make the same decision again. You want to decide that copper is worth more than children, that profits matter more than people." The old woman's final words rang through the courthouse. "My granddaughter and those 11 other children chose to die rather than let strangers destroy their culture. If you vote to desecrate their graves tonight, you're finishing what those government men started in 1987. You're killing them all over again." When Mary finished speaking, the silence stretched for nearly a minute. Several people in the crowd were crying openly. Even some of the mining company representatives looked uncomfortable. Then Marcus found himself standing, walking to the microphone without consciously deciding to do so. "My name is Marcus Wheeler," he began, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. 3 weeks ago, I was homeless, broke, and hopeless. I bought that ranch for $4 because it was all I had left in the world." He looked around the packed courthouse. "I found those children on my first night there. 12 Cherokee kids who had been trapped between worlds for 37 years, waiting for someone to see them, to hear their stories, to help them find peace. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. They taught me what family really means. They showed me that some things are worth more than money, more valuable than any mineral deposit. They taught me that love doesn't end with death, that some promises are too important to break. He turned to face the commission directly. I'm not Cherokee. I'm not from here. I have no legal standing, no political influence, no money to fight you with, but I know what it feels like to have those children trust you with their stories. I know what it means to help lost souls find their way home. Marcus's final words came from somewhere deep inside, a conviction he hadn't known he possessed. That land isn't cursed, and it's not just a mineral deposit. It's holy ground, made sacred by the love of 12 children who chose to die together rather than live apart. If you vote to destroy that tonight, you're not just killing a mining project. You're murdering the last vestige of hope in a world that's forgotten how to value anything that can't be bought and sold. As Marcus returned to his seat, the courthouse erupted in applause from the Cherokee supporters. The mining company representatives sat stone-faced, while the commissioners huddled together in whispered conversation. Chairman Peterson called for order, then announced, "The commission will recess for 30 minutes to deliberate." As the crowd filed out into the cold Montana night, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. Daniel Kingfisher stood beside him, his weathered face showing something that might have been pride. "That was well spoken," the medicine man said quietly. "But speeches don't always win votes. Are you prepared for what comes next if they vote against us?" Marcus looked back at the courthouse, then up at the star-filled sky that stretched endlessly over the mountains. Somewhere out there, on a ranch he'd bought for $4, 12 children rested peacefully in graves that powerful men wanted to desecrate for profit. "I'm prepared," he said, and realized he meant it. Whatever it takes. The 30-minute recess stretched into an hour, then 2. Outside the courthouse, tension simmered as supporters from both sides clustered in separate groups, their conversations growing more heated as the wait dragged on. Marcus found himself pacing the courthouse steps, unable to sit still, while his fate and the children's final resting place hung in the balance. A group of local ranchers had cornered Robert Standing Bear near the parking lot, their voices rising as they argued about property rights and federal overreach. Near the courthouse entrance, mining company representatives worked their phones frantically, clearly coordinating with someone off-site. The Cherokee families had formed a prayer circle on the courthouse lawn, their voices raised in traditional songs that drifted through the cold night air. Marcus was watching this careful choreography of conflict when Sarah Crow Feather approached him, her weathered face grave in the harsh glow of the security lights. "Something's not right," she said, quietly. "Commission meetings don't take this long, unless there's more going on behind closed doors." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the courthouse doors swung open and Chairman Peterson emerged, his face revealing nothing. "The commission is ready to reconvene." The crowd filed back inside, the atmosphere even more tense than before. Marcus noticed that several new faces had appeared, men in expensive suits who hadn't been there during the public testimony phase. They sat with the Apex representatives, whispering urgently among themselves. Peterson called the meeting back, to order, his voice betraying a strain that hadn't been there earlier. After careful deliberation, the Commission has reached a decision regarding Resolution 47B. The courthouse fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of wind against the windows. "However," Peterson continued, "we have also received some additional information during our recess that requires addressing before we can proceed with any vote." He gestured to one of the men in suits Marcus hadn't seen before. "This is District Attorney James Morrison. He has something to share with this body." Morrison stood, his movements precise and official. He was younger than Marcus had expected, with the kind of lean intensity that suggested he'd built his career on high-profile cases. Ladies and gentlemen, during the recess, my office was contacted by federal investigators regarding irregularities in the mineral surveys conducted by Apex Mining Consortium. Specifically, allegations that the company conducted unauthorized drilling and sampling on federal and tribal lands without proper permits. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clayton Hobbs shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "That's completely—" "Mr. Hobbs," Morrison interrupted smoothly, "I'd advise you to consult with your legal counsel before making any statements. The FBI is currently executing search warrants at your company's offices in Billings and Denver." The courthouse erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones, commissioners huddled in confused discussion, and the Apex representatives looked like they were trying to figure out whether to run or lawyer up. Through it all, Marcus sat frozen, trying to process what he was hearing. Morrison continued once the noise died down. "Furthermore, the investigation has uncovered evidence suggesting that Apex may have violated the Native American Graves Protection Act by conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys of the cemetery area without authorization from the Cherokee Nation." Mary Whitefeather's voice cut through the chaos. "They did what?" According to federal investigators, Apex conducted extensive subsurface mapping of the entire ranch property, including the burial ground, as part of their mineral assessment. This was done without the knowledge or consent of the landowner or the Cherokee Nation. Marcus felt ice in his veins. The children's graves had been violated, treated like geological obstacles to be mapped and potentially moved. The thought made him physically sick. Robert Standing Bear was on his feet, his usually controlled demeanor cracking. "District Attorney Morrison, are you telling us that this company desecrated sacred burial sites in the pursuit of profit?" "I'm telling you that federal investigators have found evidence of unauthorized survey activity that may constitute criminal violations of federal law protecting Native American burial sites and artifacts." Hobbs tried one more time to control the narrative. "These are baseless accusations being used to derail a legitimate business operation. Apex Mining has followed all applicable—" "Mr. Hobbs," Morrison's voice carried the weight of legal authority, "you are under investigation for violations of federal law. I strongly suggest you exercise your right to remain silent." The words hung in the air like a threat and a promise. Marcus watched Hobbs's face cycle through anger, fear, and calculation, before settling on something like desperate rage. "This is a setup," Hobbs declared, his voice echoing off the courthouse walls. "This whole thing, the Indian claims, the federal intervention, even this $4 purchase, it's all been orchestrated to steal billions of dollars in mineral wealth from legitimate American businesses." He pointed directly at Marcus. "That man isn't some innocent drifter. He's part of a conspiracy to defraud the American people of their natural resources. The timing is too convenient, the legal challenge is too coordinated. Someone's been planning this for months." Marcus felt every eye in the courthouse turn toward him. The accusation was so absurd, it took him a moment to find his voice. "You think I plan to buy a haunted ranch for $4 as part of some conspiracy?" "I think you're not who you claim to be," Hobbs shot back. "I think someone with deep pockets and political connections has been using you as a front to steal $50 million worth of copper." The courthouse erupted again, this time with competing shouts of support and outrage. Marcus felt the walls closing in as Hobbs's accusations gained momentum among the crowd. Some of the local ranchers were nodding, their faces showing the kind of suspicion that comes when simple explanations don't match complex realities. Chairman Peterson hammered his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "Mr. Hobbs, you are out of order. Mr. Morrison, does your investigation extend to Mr. Wheeler?" Morrison consulted a folder, his face unreadable. Mr. Wheeler is not currently under investigation. However, given Mr. Hobbs's allegations, we will be conducting a full background review to ensure there are no irregularities in the property transfer. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him. Even if he was cleared of any wrongdoing, the investigation would take months, maybe years. In the meantime, the ranch would remain in legal limbo, the children's graves unprotected, their stories reduced to footnotes in a federal criminal case. But it was Daniel Kingfisher who cut through the chaos with a single, powerful observation. "You want to know about conspiracies?" the medicine man said, rising slowly from his seat. His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made even the shouting crowd pause to listen. "Let me tell you about a real conspiracy." He walked to the front of the courthouse, his traditional clothing and weathered face a stark contrast to the suited lawyers and politicians surrounding him. In 1987, 12 Cherokee children disappeared because government officials and private contractors conspired to steal their families' land and destroy their culture. Those children died alone and afraid because powerful men decided their lives were worth less than mineral rights and economic development. Daniel's voice grew stronger, filling the courthouse. Now, 37 years later, different, powerful men are using the same arguments, the same tactics, the same disrespect for Cherokee lives and Cherokee sacred places. They're calling it economic development, but it's the same old story. White men in suits deciding that Cherokee children don't matter. He turned to face Hobbs directly. "You want to talk about theft? Your company violated federal law to map those children's graves without permission. You treated sacred burial sites like geological inconveniences to be surveyed and catalogued. You committed the exact same crimes against Cherokee people that led to those children's deaths in the first place." The courthouse was dead silent now, every person hanging on Daniel's words. Marcus Wheeler didn't conspire to steal anything. He did what no one else has done in 37 years. He listened to those children's voices, honored their stories, and helped them find peace. The only conspiracy here is the one that's been running for over a century. The conspiracy to treat Cherokee people like obstacles to profit instead of human beings deserving of respect. When Daniel finished speaking, the silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Commissioner Peterson cleared his throat. "Given the federal investigation and the serious allegations being made by all parties, this commission is postponing any vote on Resolution 47B pending the outcome of the FBI investigation. This meeting is adjourned." The gavel fell with finality, but Marcus knew the fight was far from over. As the crowd began to disperse, he found himself surrounded by reporters shouting questions, Cherokee supporters offering encouragement, and mining company representatives glaring with unconcealed hostility. Through it all, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm. The children's graves were safe for now, protected by federal investigation and tribal advocacy. But more than that, their stories had been heard, their humanity acknowledged, their worth affirmed by people who understood that some things really were more valuable than money. Outside the courthouse, as the crowd slowly dispersed into the Montana night, Sarah Crow Feather approached Marcus one final time. "This isn't over," she warned. "Men like Hobbs don't give up just because of federal investigations. They'll find other ways, use other tactics. Are you ready for a long fight?" Marcus looked up at the stars visible above the courthouse, thinking about 12 children who had waited 37 years for someone to see them, to hear them, to fight for them. "As long as it takes," he said quietly. "Those children trusted me with their stories. I'm not giving up on them now." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew the hardest battles were still ahead. The federal investigation would take months to resolve, during which time Apex and other mining interests would be working every angle, exploring every legal loophole, applying every form of pressure they could muster. The war for Blackwater Ranch had only just begun. As Marcus drove back up the mountain road toward his ranch, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The mining company's camp beyond his property line had tripled in size during the evening, with new equipment and more personnel visible under the harsh glare of portable floodlights. They weren't retreating. They were digging in for a siege, and, somewhere in the darkness ahead, 12 graves waited under the Montana sky, their occupants depending on one broken man who had bought their resting place for $4 and found something worth dying for. The morning after the commission meeting, Marcus woke to the sound of chainsaws. He stumbled to his window and felt his heart sink. During the night, Apex Mining had clear-cut a swathe of forest right up to his property line, creating an ugly scar across the mountainside that stretched for nearly a mile. The message was unmistakable. If we can't have your land, we'll make sure you can't enjoy it. But that was only the beginning. Over the next week, the harassment campaign escalated with military precision. Heavy machinery operated around the clock just beyond his fence line, creating a constant din of diesel engines and grinding metal that made sleep impossible. Bright floodlights turned night into day, their glare penetrating every window of the ranch house. The access road was suddenly busy with oversized trucks that kicked up clouds of dust and left deep ruts in the gravel. Marcus's phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and people claiming to represent various mining interests with generous offers for his property. When he stopped answering, they started showing up in person, smooth-talking men in expensive cars who seemed to know an uncomfortable amount about his personal history. "You've had a tough life, Marcus," said one particularly persistent visitor, a silver-haired man who introduced himself as a mineral rights consultant. "Lost your job, lost your apartment, nearly lost everything. But that can all change. We're prepared to offer you $2 million cash for a quick sale. Think about what that money could mean for your future." Marcus had closed the door in the man's face, but the conversation haunted him. $2 million was more money than he'd ever dreamed of having. It could solve every financial problem he'd ever had, give him security for the rest of his life. All he had to do was walk away from 12 graves and the promise he'd made to protect them. The real psychological warfare began when they started targeting his past. A local newspaper ran a front-page story about Marcus's employment history, painting him as a drifter who'd been fired from multiple jobs for reliability issues. The article conveniently omitted the context that he'd been caring for his dying mother, that the job losses had been due to medical emergencies and family obligations, not incompetence or dishonesty. Someone leaked his credit report, his eviction notices, his medical bills from his mother's final illness. Suddenly, Marcus Wheeler's life was an open book for anyone with an internet connection to judge. Social media exploded with theories about his motives, his background, his mental health. Local. Man claims to talk to ghosts. Blocks major economic development, read one particularly nasty headline. The accompanying article painted him as either a con artist or mentally unstable, possibly both. But it was the personal attacks that hurt the most. Someone had tracked down his ex-girlfriend, Linda, who'd left him during his mother's illness. She gave an interview describing him as unstable and obsessive, claiming he'd had bizarre conversations with people who weren't there during his mother's final months. What she described as mental illness, Marcus knew had been grief and exhaustion. What she called conversations with invisible people had been a son talking to his dying mother, trying to comfort her during her final confused, delirious days. But the interviewer presented it as evidence of psychological problems that cast doubt on his claims about supernatural experiences at the ranch. The Cherokee community rallied around him, but they faced their own pressure campaign. Tribal Council. Members found their funding questioned, their programs scrutinized by federal auditors who seemed remarkably well informed about bureaucratic vulnerabilities. Daniel Kingfisher's traditional healing practice was suddenly subject to health department inspections. Sarah Crowfeather's grandson lost his job at a local bank after his employer received concerns about potential conflicts of interest. The message was clear: support Marcus Wheeler and you'll pay the price. 3 weeks into the siege, Marcus was reaching his breaking point. The constant noise, the invasion of privacy, the relentless pressure, it was wearing him down in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself jumping at shadows, second-guessing every decision, wondering if the Cherokee families would be better off if he just took the money and disappeared. That's when the accident started. The first incident happened on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was repairing a fence post when a stray piece of mining equipment, a massive drill bit, came rolling down the hillside directly toward him. He dove aside just in time, the steel bit embedding itself in the fence post where his head had been moments before. Equipment malfunction. The mining foreman apologized when Marcus confronted him. These mountain slopes are tricky. Gravity plays hell with machinery. 2 days later, a misplaced explosive charge detonated during the night, close enough to his property line to shatter every window on the north side of the ranch house. The mining company's lawyer was full of apologies and offered to pay for repairs, but Marcus wasn't fooled. The timing had been too precise, the placement too strategic. The final accident nearly killed him. Marcus was checking on the cemetery, something he did multiple times each day now, when he heard the rumble of heavy machinery approaching fast. He looked up to see a massive bulldozer careening down the slope, its blade lowered, heading directly for the burial ground. There was no operator visible in the cab. Marcus ran toward the machine, shouting, waving his arms, trying to intercept it before it reached the graves. The dozer was moving faster than any equipment should on that steep terrain, as if someone had released the brakes and let physics take over. He reached the first headstone just as the bulldozer's blade caught the edge of little Joseph's grave. Marker. The stone exploded in a shower of fragments, some sharp enough to draw blood from Marcus's face as he threw himself across the gravesite. The dozer kept coming. Marcus closed his eyes, preparing for impact, when the machine suddenly lurched to a stop. The engine died with a mechanical wheeze, and silence fell over the mountainside. When Marcus opened his eyes, he found himself face to face with Annie Whitefeather. She stood between him and the bulldozer, her small form shimmering with that familiar golden light. Around her, the other 11 children materialized, not solid like they'd been during the ceremony, but present enough to be seen, to be felt. "They can't destroy us," Annie said softly, her child's voice carrying impossible strength. "They can break our stones, scatter our bones, but they can't touch what we really are." Marcus looked around at the children who had somehow returned to protect their own graves. "I thought you'd moved on. I thought you were at peace." Thomas stepped forward, his teenage face serious. We are. But peace doesn't mean abandoning the people we love. You've been fighting for us, so we came back to fight for you." Little Joseph, who had never spoken directly to Marcus while alive or dead, approached shyly. "The man in the machine," he whispered. "He jumped out before it started moving. He's hiding in the trees, watching." Marcus turned toward the forest line, and sure enough, he could see a figure crouched behind a fallen log about 50 yards away. The runaway bulldozer had been deliberate sabotage, attempted murder disguised as an industrial accident. "Call the police," Rose suggested. "Tell them what you saw." But Marcus knew better. The police would find an empty forest and a story about ghost children that would only fuel more speculation about his mental state. The man hiding in the trees would disappear. The bulldozer would be explained as mechanical failure, and Marcus would look even more unstable. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started recording. "My name is Marcus Wheeler," he said clearly, addressing the camera. It's October 15th, 2024, and I'm standing in the cemetery at Blackwater Ranch. 5 minutes ago, an unmanned bulldozer nearly killed me and destroyed the grave of a Cherokee child named Joseph Crow Dog. He panned the camera to show the damaged headstone, the bulldozer's blade still embedded in the earth where the grave marker had stood. This was no accident. Someone deliberately sent this machine down the hill to destroy these graves, and possibly kill me. This is what happens when you stand up to corporations that value copper more than children, profit more than human dignity. Marcus turned the camera toward the forest where the saboteur was hiding. And to whoever's watching from the trees, you failed. You can't kill what's already dead, and you can't scare away people who have nothing left to lose. As if responding to his words, the children became more visible, their forms growing brighter in the afternoon sun. Marcus kept recording as Annie approached the damaged grave, knelt beside the broken stone, and began to sing, a Cherokee lullaby that seemed to make the very air shimmer with emotion. One by one, the other children joined in, their voices creating harmonies that no living person should have been able to hear, much less record. But Marcus's phone captured it all, the song, the light, the undeniable presence of 12 children who refused to be silenced. When the song ended, Annie looked directly into the camera. We are Annie Whitefeather, Thomas Riversong, Paul and Peter Crow Dog, Rose Standing Bear, Mary Kingfisher, Little Joseph, Sarah Two Wolves, David Running Horse, Emma Tall Bear, Michael Bearclaw, and Susan Morningstar. We died here in 1987, but we are not gone. We are Cherokee children, and our graves are sacred, and we will not be moved. The children began to fade as Marcus ended the recording, but Annie lingered for a moment longer. Don't give up, she whispered. Don't let them win. Too many Cherokee children have been silenced over the centuries. Don't let us be added to that list. As the last traces of the children disappeared, Marcus heard the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines coming. Fast. He looked toward the access road and saw a convoy of black SUVs racing toward the ranch, followed by what looked like news vans. The FBI had arrived, and based on the media presence, someone had tipped off the press. Marcus pocketed his phone, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the approaching vehicles. In his pocket, the recording of 12 ghost children defending their own graves felt like evidence of something that transcended legal proceedings and corporate pressure campaigns. The final battle for Blackwater Ranch was about to begin. The lead FBI agent stepped out of the first SUV, her badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. Agent Sarah Martinez was younger than Marcus had expected, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and the kind of controlled intensity that suggested she'd built her career on cases that mattered. "Mr. Wheeler," she called out as she approached. "I'm Agent Martinez. We need to talk." Behind her, a small army of federal agents spread across the ranch grounds, some heading toward the mining equipment, others toward the damaged cemetery. News crews scrambled to set up cameras, their reporters already broadcasting live updates to audiences across the country. "We have evidence of potential criminal activity," Martinez continued, "including violations of federal environmental laws, destruction of protected Native American burial sites, and now..." She gestured toward the bulldozer still embedded in little Joseph's grave, attempted destruction of evidence and possible assault with a deadly weapon. Marcus pulled out his phone, his hands remarkably steady. "Agent Martinez, you need to see this." The recording played on his phone screen, 12 Cherokee children appearing to defend their graves, their voices singing lullabies that should have been impossible to capture on digital media. Agent Martinez watched without expression, her face revealing nothing. When the video ended, she looked up at Marcus. "Mr. Wheeler, are you claiming that spirits of deceased children helped you identify the perpetrator of this attack?" "I'm claiming that someone tried to kill me with a bulldozer, and I have evidence of it," Marcus rewound the video to show the empty operator's cab, the deliberate nature of the machine's path. There's a man hiding in those trees who sabotaged this equipment. Whether you believe the children helped me spot him is up to you. Martinez signaled to her team, and agents immediately fanned out toward the forest. Within minutes, they'd located the saboteur, a nervous-looking man in Apex coveralls who claimed he'd been checking equipment when the bulldozer malfunctioned, but it was what they found in his truck that changed everything. Agent Martinez, one of the federal investigators, called out, "You need to see this." In the saboteur's vehicle, agents discovered detailed maps of the ranch property, photographs of Marcus's daily routines, and a payment receipt from a private security company contracted by Apex Mining. More damning still was a cell phone containing text messages coordinating the accident with someone identified only as C.H. Clayton Hobbs. As news crews captured federal agents arresting the saboteur, Agent Martinez approached Marcus again. "Mr. Wheeler, this investigation has uncovered a pattern of criminal activity that goes far beyond mining permits. We're looking at conspiracy, attempted murder, violation of federal laws protecting Native American sacred sites, and potential racketeering charges." She paused, studying the damaged cemetery. "But I have to ask, this recording of yours, the audio quality is remarkable for a phone video. Those voices, that singing, how do you explain it?" Marcus looked around at the graves, thinking of 12 children who had trusted him with their stories, their love, their final resting place. "Agent Martinez, some things can't be explained. They can only be experienced, witnessed, believed. And you believe these children's spirits are real. I believe that love doesn't end with death. I believe that some promises are too important to break, even when breaking them would be easier. And I believe that 12 Cherokee children chose to trust me with their stories because they knew I'd fight for them when no one else would." Before Martinez could respond, a commotion erupted near the ranch house. Clayton Hobbs had arrived with his own security team and a fleet of lawyers, their black vehicles forming an aggressive line facing the federal agents. "This is harassment," Hobbs shouted, striding toward Agent Martinez with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "My company is conducting legitimate business activities, and this witch hunt is costing American taxpayers millions of dollars." Martinez held up the evidence bag containing the saboteur's phone. "Mr. Hobbs, your employee was caught attempting to destroy federal evidence and commit assault with a deadly weapon. Text messages on his phone suggest direct coordination with someone using your initials." Hobbs's face cycled through several emotions before settling on desperate rage. Those messages could have been sent by anyone. This whole thing is a setup designed to steal billions of dollars in mineral wealth from legitimate American businesses. "Mr. Hobbs," Martinez said calmly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, destruction of federal property, and violation of the Native American Graves Protection Act." As federal agents moved to arrest him, Hobbs turned toward Marcus with pure hatred in his eyes. "You think you've won something? You think this is over? There are dozens of companies like mine, hundreds of politicians who understand that economic development trumps ghost stories every time." He gestured wildly at the cemetery. "Those kids have been dead for 37 years. They don't need the land anymore. But living people, American families, need the jobs this mine would create. You're stealing food from children's mouths for a bunch of moldy bones." The words hung in the air like blasphemy. Even some of the federal agents looked uncomfortable with Hobbs's callous dismissal of the children's humanity. But it was Daniel, Kingfisher's voice, that cut through the tension. "Mr. Hobbs," the medicine man said, approaching slowly from the tree line where he'd been observing the proceedings. "You speak of stealing food from children, but Cherokee children have been having food stolen from them by men like you for over 200 years. He gestured toward the graves. These 12 children starved to death in 1987 because government officials and private contractors conspired to steal their families' land and destroy their culture. They died hiding from men who wanted to put them in schools designed to kill. The Indian and save the man. Daniel's voice grew stronger, carrying across the ranch to the news cameras, broadcasting live to millions of viewers. And now, 37 years later, you want to dig up their graves for copper. You want to complete the job those earlier men started, the total erasure of Cherokee children from the landscape they died trying to protect. The medicine man looked directly into the nearest news camera. But here's what Mr. Hobbs doesn't understand. Cherokee children don't disappear just because you kill them. Cherokee stories don't die just because you silence the storytellers. Cherokee love doesn't end just because you separate families. As if summoned by his words, the air around the cemetery began to shimmer. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a soft singing began, barely audible at first, then growing stronger. Marcus watched in amazement as the children appeared one final time, not just to him, but visible to everyone present. News cameras captured their translucent forms, their golden light, their faces full of dignity and peace. Federal agents stopped what they were doing to stare. Even Hobbs's lawyers seemed frozen by the impossible sight. Annie Whitefeather stepped forward, her child's voice somehow reaching every person on the ranch. "We are not gone," she said simply. "We are Cherokee children, and our stories live on. Our graves are sacred, and our families remember us, and our love protects this place." She looked directly at Hobbs, her dark eyes holding centuries of wisdom. "You cannot kill what is already dead, sir, and you cannot steal what was never yours to take." The other children joined her, their voices rising in traditional Cherokee songs that seemed to make the very earth vibrate with emotion. The singing lasted maybe 3 minutes, but in that time, Marcus watched hardened federal agents wipe away tears, saw news reporters struggle to maintain professional composure, witnessed the transformation of a legal proceeding into something approaching religious experience. When the children finally faded away, the silence that followed was profound and reverent. Agent Martinez was the first to speak, her voice softer than before. "Mr. Wheeler, I think it's safe to say that this investigation has documented some very unusual circumstances. Regardless of how one explains what we just witnessed, it's clear that this site has extraordinary significance that goes far beyond mineral rights." She turned to address the news cameras directly. "The FBI's investigation has uncovered extensive criminal activity by Apex Mining Consortium, including conspiracy, attempted assault, and systematic violation of federal laws protecting Native American sacred sites. All mining activities on or adjacent to this property are permanently suspended." Clayton Hobbs, now in handcuffs, made one final desperate attempt to control the narrative. "This is all fabricated. Special effects, mass hysteria, some kind of hoax designed to steal—" "Mr. Hobbs," Martinez interrupted, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise it." As federal agents led Hobbs away, Marcus found himself surrounded by Cherokee families who had arrived during the confrontation. Mary Whitefeather approached slowly, her ancient face radiant with something that looked like triumph. "They're safe now," she said softly, looking toward the cemetery where her granddaughter rested. "Annie and all the others, they're finally safe." Daniel Kingfisher placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You kept your promise. You protected them when they couldn't protect themselves. You gave them voices when the world wanted them to stay silent." Marcus looked around at the ranch that had become his home, his purpose, his calling. The mining equipment was being removed by federal agents. The harassment campaign was over. The children's graves were protected not just by law, but by the recorded testimony of 12 spirits who had refused to be silenced. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Sarah Crow Feather smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since they'd Emet. Now you live, Marcus Wheeler. You live on land that's been blessed by love stronger than death, protected by spirits who chose you as their guardian, surrounded by a Cherokee family that will never abandon you. As the sun set over Blackwater, Ranch Marcus stood among the graves of 12 children who had taught him the true meaning of family, sacrifice, and love. The ranch he'd bought for $4 had given him something infinitely more valuable: a home, a purpose, and a story worth telling. The curse of Blackwater Ranch was broken forever. In its place stood something much more powerful, a testament to the enduring strength of Cherokee children who had chosen love over fear, family over safety, and hope over despair. And in the growing twilight, if you listened carefully, you could still hear them singing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.